This is insanity. It takes a PhD to be that stupid. I can say that. I've got a PhD even though I wasn't homeschooled. They get on the phone and they call me and they said, what on earth should we do? They destroyed our property, basically, and they shut down our protest. What should we do? So what should you do? It rhymes with do. You sue. It's easy. And they're like, oh, we just don't know if we should be suing our own university. And I'm like, well, that's an institute, not a university. That didn't work, okay? So I got on the phone and I called David French. And David French called them and said, can I drive down from Nashville to Atlanta? And he sat down with them in a coffee shop. If it's Atlanta, probably Starbucks. And he sat down and he said, I just talked to my friend Mike Adams. And he says that you're not willing to defend our Constitution here in the United States of America when no one's shooting at you in air conditioning courtrooms. I'm about to go off to Iraq to oversee Al-Qaeda interrogations. As a matter of fact, the first interrogation that he oversaw, the guy actually threw up on him. Okay, it's a true story. But he's in Baghdad. People are shooting at him. And he says, I'm going to go defend our country and defend constitutional principles while people are shooting at me. What's your problem? And he actually lays this guilt trip on them. And they actually just said, we'll sign. And they decided to be the plaintiffs in the case. And we were feeling really good about this. And then the litigation started. We thought this was going to be an incredibly simple case. They would actually file in October of 2006. Guess what? It went on for 2 years. And in February of 2008, I was speaking at CPAC, and Ruth was there. And she approached me, she says, I want to talk to you after your speech. And she sat down with me. And she said, David French, you guys talked me into this lawsuit. My whole life was great before this lawsuit. And now it's just terrible. And do you know what they were doing to her and Reed? It was insane. They were actually, the Gay Straight Alliance was actually having protest in her dorm lobby, in which they were actually making signs that said Ruth Malhotra is a Twinkie followed by the B word, and they were handing out Twinkies. And some of you are going, what does that mean? I'll explain it to you. They were handing the Twinkies to people, and people were saying, what is this Twinkie? They said, it's Ruth Malhotra. What do you mean? We mean, see, because she's half Asian Indian and half Filipino, they said she's yellow on the outside, but she's white on the inside. Making racial comments, calling her the B word, even worse with Arit Sklar, the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. And they find pictures of her on the internet and they superimpose swastikas on her t-shirt and they start circulating them around the internet. It's insane. I share that part of the story with you for a simple reason. You may think that people are well-intentioned with campus speech codes. They just want to make people feel comfortable, right? No. What did Steve McNamee say? They pick and choose winners and losers in the marketplace of ideas. But you know what? This is identity politics. You see, it's a political weapon for them. Certain political interest groups on our campuses, the Gay Straight Alliance is just one example. There are others. I don't mean to pick on them. There are many. They consider this to be a political weapon for them to shut down speech that they can't rebut. I've got a definition, by the way, for hate speech. I think it's speech that the left hates because they lack the intelligence to rebut it. And so they use this as a weapon to attack people. Does everyone understand? This battle is not about principle at all for them. It is all about identity politics. And as she was sharing that story with me, I almost cried. I wanted to give her a good Bible verse when she was like, you ruined my life. And I wish that I had Genesis 37 through 50 on my mind and heart at that time, where I could have just told her to read the story of Joseph. He's way up here, and then he's way down there, right? And then later on, he's restored. And the most common verse you hear throughout those 14 or so chapters is over and over, and God was with Joseph, and God was with Joseph, and God was with Joseph. But I just wasn't thinking, and so she went home, I went home, and we waited. 8 months later, we get the decision from Judge Owen Forrester in a federal district court in Atlanta, Georgia. He struck down the Georgia Institute of Technology speech code as being unconstitutional. They won, and they won big, because the judge ordered Georgia Tech to not modify any of its student speech or conduct policies for a period of 5 years without the express permission of the federal court. He sent them to their room for 5 years. He grounded them for 5 years. Awesome victory. Couldn't get any better, could it? Yes, it could. A couple of weeks after that, they have to decide, what are the attorney's fees that are owed to my good friend David French? They end up writing my good friend David French a check for $202,000 in attorney's fees. And that bought a lot of ammunition. I didn't mean bullets, but they put it in the bank to go after other universities that were doing the same thing. Story couldn't get better, could it? Actually, it does. The next CPAC, February of 2009, I'm at home. I didn't get invited that year because I may or may not have said something slightly offensive on C-SPAN. But that's another story. I'm not open forum. That's what that's for. I'm at home, and here comes the phone again. Ruth Malhotra calls me on Friday night, the last full day of CPAC. And she says, why aren't you at CPAC this year? And I kind of explained it, basically. And I said, well, you're at CPAC, I presume. She said, yeah. We just went to the Reagan dinner. And if you've never been to CPAC before, the Reagan dinner is the most awesome part of the week. It's this huge gala dinner, and it's done in basically in the memory of Ronald Reagan. And they do something awesome. They give an award to the most outstanding young conservative activist in the United States of America. They get a check for $10,000, and it's handed to them on national television, and it is a virtual guarantee that they will have good employment for the rest of their lives. And so I said, oh, you just finished the Reagan dinner. I said, well, Ruth, who won the Reagan Award this year? And she said, you know, it's a funny story. They usually give it to one person, but this year they gave it to 2 people. And I said, I know you're from the South, but finish the story. Who was it? I'm trying to offend all of you, by the way. And that's when she just paused, and she said, it was Mina Reed. They won the Reagan Award. Each of them $10,000. Recognition on national television. The most prestigious award a young conservative could win. She was only 23 years old when she won it. The result of that is she's become an icon in the conservative movement. She now has her dream job working for Ravi Zacharias Ministries down in Atlanta, Georgia. And I wanted to share that story with you because it really illustrates a couple of important principles. We can fight and we can win battles in the court of public opinion using the First Amendment to restore the First Amendment while we've still got it. But sometimes the enemy is so wicked and so determined that we must resort to the courts of law as well. On a very personal level, I want to tell you that Ruth's story has been just the same thing as my story. We both had a decision point where we had to go forward and make a decision. Are we going to stand up or are we going to sit down? And it has had a transformative effect on our lives. Doing the right thing in principle ultimately will pay off. You might be up here and you might be dragged down here for a little while, but ultimately God will restore you. God doesn't punish people for telling the truth. Do you understand that principle? In See It Summit Ministries, we're here to do 2 things. All these brilliant people like Scott Klusendorf and John Stonestreet, and the list goes on and on. They're fantastic professors, and they'll get up and they'll give you ideas. And they will teach you how to defend your faith. But you've got to understand that sometimes someone's got to be standing behind you, defending you while you defend the faith. The Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, even though they're not all believers, that's one resource. The Alliance Defending Freedom is another. I practice what I preach. I just finished a 7-year litigation with the ADF where we won a jury verdict back on March 20th. And in a landmark case, after which the judge ordered my university to pay the ADF in the amount of $710,000 in legal fees. Sometimes doing the right thing pays in other ways as well. That's one of the stories I'll share with you before you leave Summit. In the meantime, enjoy your lunch. I'll be back this afternoon. Thank you so much for listening.